Things in the past can't be undone, but what we have control of is right now, which can project our future.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and for you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
First off, I just want to say Hihani Washte, Chante Washte Nape Chuzapelo, which in Lakota that means good morning. I shake your hand with a good heart. And Daya Yahi is I'm happy you're here, and I'm thankful I'm here to be able to speak with you. My name is Braylan Benoist. I come from the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe in Eagle Butte, South Dakota. And primarily the people in that area are classified as Lakota or Lakota. And I am a recent 2019 graduate of University of Minnesota Morris. I had a degree in psychology and studio art, double major, and I'm a recent candidate for an MSW from Washington University. I'm a part of the Buddha Center, and my emphasis is in social work with emphasis in American Indian and Alaskan Native. And currently a part of the Buddha Center, I am the co-chair for the powwow, which is happening next year in April. So busy with that, but keeping me active with campus. And yeah, that's just a little bit about myself.
My name's Lou Meeker, and I'm originally from Pennsylvania, 89 years old. And it seems like I've worked all my life, but I've enjoyed every bit of it. The Lord's been good to me, and which enabled me to be here at Kent Ridge. I have started out as a lineman, electric lineman. I worked in there for 12 years, served in the United States Army in the Presidential Honor Guard at Arlington National Cemetery in 1953. And came back to work for Penn Power, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Ohio Edison. And in 1971, I was promoted to safety director for Ohio Edison as a director of safety and security. And I retired after 44 plus years of service.
So, thank you for sharing that with me, and thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
So I guess we get into this, huh? With you got questions?
Yeah, what are the origins of the Native American heritage, the day and the month? How did we select this?
Well, I guess it depends. When you look at Native Americans, there's such a vast variety of different tribes, different traditions, different customs. And so I don't, off the top of my head, have the specific date and why it's chosen, a specific month as to why it's chosen. Again, each tribe has their own view on it. But again, it's just this idea of acknowledgement. And I feel like that's a continued process that we're going through. So again, with this idea of giving a month to honor Native Americans, in essence, is again that process in which we need to make in order to get back to a sense of equilibrium, in a sense of, okay, well, the past is there. We're here in the future now, in a sense, and it's this idea of acknowledgement. And so it gives us a time and place that we're able to share our cultures, we're able to honor our history, and again, acknowledge that we're still here in essence. And so in a sense of going forward, you know, we're still relevant in today's times. And so in the sense of the history of Native American History Month, again, that's relatively new. It's one of those things that it's ever ongoing, and however it's interpreted is going to continue to change throughout the years. And so, which is interesting, you know, because again, it's you know, we have very vocal activist groups that really push for a lot of things. So again, to have a month that's dedicated to Native Americans is very beneficial in the sense of us being able to have that voice broadcasted even louder in a sense, and pushing issues. And so, again, personally, with the origins, I'm not too certain as to that. But again, I do know it's relatively new because the conversation between Native Americans and the US government hasn't been the best up until probably, I'd say, believe it was 78 when the Religious Freedom Act came through. We were able to acquire a lot more sense of self, sense of expression. And so I'd say within the past 30, 40 years, it is when it came about. And even so, more so in today's times, there's a lot more acknowledgement. And, that was largely due to whenever President Obama was in office, he made it part of his agenda to make sure that Native Americans were honored and Native Americans that were heard. And that was kind of part of his big spiel. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. But what's the approximate number of Native Americans still surviving?
This is a real thing, but we make up 0.1% of the entire population of the United States. And so we, in essence of the entire population, we're not a big voice, but the sense of, so I believe my reservation, where I come from, it's upwards to, I want to say 30 to 40,000. And that's, shooting the number high, but that's people that live off reservations. And so there's people that live on reservations, which isn't a large number, but those that live off reservations also add to that collective. And that's kind of how a lot of tribes get their funding. So again, in comparison to the general population, Native American statistics are extremely low, but also that kind of offsets a lot of things. That's why it seems like the things such as alcoholism, seems like poverty are super high, but it's just a low comparison rate in the sense of we don't have a huge population to draw from and compare to.
Now, is the number steady increasing or is it decreasing?
I would say we're starting to intertwine with other tribes as well, and we're trying to intertwine with other races as well. So again, we're slowly creating this more diverse group of people, but the idea of the established tribes are still there. I would say they're increasing, but again, we're still facing issues that are really plaguing Native Americans in the sense of diabetes. That's a big thing on the reservation. Cancer, that's again, those are the two things, and then alcoholism, and then the latest thing has been teen suicide rates. And so we're still facing a high level of adversity, which, again, we can push our numbers higher as we want, but again, we have these setbacks that don't really allow us to grow in essence. So I would say the number, it varies from year to year. It's a sense of, but the idea of a traditional speaker, somebody who speaks the language, that is drastically declining.
Well, are the challenges that the Native Americans face today, are they more severe than they were back years ago? Or is it getting better?
Well, I think what it is it just takes a different approach. Again, this idea of genocide, this idea of being placed into reservations, that's really transitioned. And so again, we're feeling the after effects. And one thing that's very subjective in nature, something that we really haven't done enough research on, is this idea of historical trauma. So everything that was done back then is still being felt today. One of the big things is recently there has been a rise in uncovering of Native American youth that were buried at residential schools, boarding schools, and that were unnamed or either unmarked. And so I believe that number recently is upwards into 7,000 Native American youth that were at some point, died and it was not relayed back to their family. And so again, that still affects Native Americans in today's time, because, my grandparents were a part of that boarding school process, and the things they had to endure while there still can be felt in today's times in the sense of our lack of having the language.
As we look in the rear and come forward, the tragedies that faced the Indians, Native Americans back then, killing the buffalo, reservations and all that stuff, is that what can we do as citizens to help those eliminate or at least focus on those past tragedies for the Native Americans?
Well, that's a very noble question in the sense of, what can be done is the question. And I even, as myself, as a Native American, ask, well, what do I need from society in order to continue moving forward? And everything I have is there. It's just the essence of, and that's just for me, but again, this idea of the know-how on how to facilitate those things. So this idea of education, this idea of higher pursuing careers, workforce, etc. These opportunities are as equal to me as they are for anybody in the general population, but it's just that the fact of coming from a reservation where we have this ideal in ourselves, not knowing that, these opportunities are out here. So for me, my thing that I've really come to conclusion is this idea of acknowledgement, this idea of, so in the sense of what we're doing today in this interview, this discussion is I believe what we're working towards is this idea of acknowledging and moving in the sense of saying, okay, well, I am a part of this group. We are together. We are working forward, because again, things in the past can't be undone. But what we have control of is right now, which can project our future. And I believe that's where we have to start looking, because we get so caught up in this idea of looking back at all the atrocities, all the tragedies, everything bestowed upon Native people. And it's hard to digest in a sense of, with anything, you can look back at something and in comparison, something such as the Holocaust, where it's like, I can't believe we as human beings lived through a time like that. And same thing with segregation, racism. We lived through a time in that sense. But again, it's just ever ongoing fact of us moving forward. And so this idea of, we have to acknowledge the past and say that did happen, but we are still alive. We're still resilient. We're still here. How can we move forward in a positive direction? So the idea of acknowledgement is huge. That's been my general sense of what can we be doing,
Well, Bray, do you find that the public, the American public, is more sympathetic towards the Native Americans now, or is it getting worse, or we reached a high point, or whatever?
Well, I feel like there's so many, in that essence of that question, there's so many minorities in this country now that are having a voice, whether it's the Latino community down in, on the borders, or it's the Black communities, whether it's St. Louis or whether it's in Minneapolis. So there's so many minorities right now that are fighting for their cause. And this Native American cause has been this ongoing throughout the years, whether it be, again, we weren't US citizens until the early, I believe after World War I. So Native Americans that fought in World War I weren't even US citizens just yet. And then we go forward to the idea of the civil rights movement. And then in the 70s, we had the American Indian movement. And then that led into the Religious Freedom Act, which allowed us to practice our ways again without fear of prosecution. So it's this idea of, it's this ever ongoing battle. And I believe, again, there's always going to be somebody that doesn't agree with what we do, in a sense of, why not just move on? Why not, etc. Because in today's time, we're still battling oil companies, in the essence of drawing oil from reservations or crossing major water sources that provide for our communities. And again, there's the environmental risks to that. And, it's this idea of protecting what little we have left. So again, we're creating this voice that kind of becomes a thorn in much of the population's side, but it's that thorn that isn't going away. And so I believe it's this dialogue between us and the United States in general is going to constantly be ongoing until we reach that level of, again, where we're both equilibrium. We're not trying to fight to be better than the other, but we're just trying to fight to be saying we're a part of this as well, and we have an equal say in it all.
Well, How do the treaties that we have with the Native American affect the communities of the Native Americans and or all of us?
Yeah. Well, treaties again, it's one of those things where when they were created, you have Native American people and then you have the U.S. government viewed as equals in a sense of they were equal nations when making those treaties that they decided, okay, well, we're going to come together in a sense of create this bond in the form of the treaty. So those treaties are still intact. They have been altered in many ways, but those treaties are basically what gives us our lifeway still. This idea of us being able to continue to work on ourselves in a sense of self-sovereignty. And even then, that was something that we struggled with in a sense of understanding how we can improve our governments on tribal reservations. And that's one thing that's still affected by treaties is having that obligation to the US government, but also fulfilling the people's needs and wants. And so it's this idea of the treaties state, I'm kind of formulate that idea, but this idea of treaties is they're there for us to remind us of our past in the sense of we were able to make those agreements and the US government in whatever way has to honor those said agreements, but also struggles to make those agreements in a modern context because I believe when they were created, and this is my personal belief, is they didn't think past a certain X amount of years because the deals are the agreements made have since changed because they're unable to give, because one part of it was we're able to acquire a certain amount of land. After they stopped giving out land, this is just for my tribe, they started giving out money. And once the money ran out, then now it's just this idea of a thought rather than anything. There's no money, there's nothing there. But again, we still have IHS, we still have food programs, we still get assistance for single mothers, we still get assistance for housing, etc. Not in the way we would like, but again, we still get that assistance. But again, it's not that it's owed to us in a sense of like we're not sitting there thinking like, oh well, when do we get our next payout? But rather it's saying we made this agreement. It's up to the U.S. government to uphold that agreement.
Well, what are some of the modern challenges that face the Native Americans today, versus what was back years ago?
I guess the simple fact is being able to strive in today's times. This idea of having a vision of which way you want to, a direction you want to go. Because if you go to a reservation, it's a complete night and day to being out here in society, and that's something I've learned firsthand is this idea of interacting with the world outside the reservation. And so one thing that we struggle with as communities is this idea of leaving that close-knit community and being able to come out here and interact with society and able to take that back in a positive manner. We're still stuck in this idea where we're, focused on the minuscule, I wouldn't say minuscule, but the smaller conflicts on reservation life. And so I feel like that's where a lot of Native Americans get stuck on. And again, we do battle a lot within the boundaries of reservations, whether it's, teen suicide rates, alcoholism, diabetes, those are huge things. But it's this idea of being a Native American in modern context and knowing that it doesn't go with general society in a sense, and this idea of there's a lot more to it than just 9-to-5 jobs, etc. This idea of community, this idea of interacting with one's family and how that makes Native Americans unique in a sense. So it's finding a way to make that fit into modern time. And I think that's where we struggle with is trying to be able to be successful, but also keep this idea of ourselves.
Do you find, or the Native Americans find it more difficult to deal with the government today? As a regular citizen, it's difficult to deal with the government. Is it the same thing is true with the Native Americans?
I guess, in light to recent governments, it has been tough on everybody, and we could see that from a sense. And being Native American, it's kind of like, when things weren't going right, it's just like, well, you guys understand now how the government has that ability, to be able to not uphold their end of the deal. And so I would believe in today's times we're a lot more heard in the sense of, we do have social media, we have platforms that are able to back us, and now we have people in higher roles in the government that follow in a sense of Native American. They carry those Native American values with them. One that comes off the top of my head is Deb Haaland, and I believe she's representative for either New Mexico or Arizona, and she currently is in the House of Representatives, I do believe, and she's creating this Native voice, and it's the idea of us being able to see somebody of Native heritage within the U.S. government is us turning that tide slowly. And so it's this idea of having that voice now. So I believe in today's time we're able to have a stronger voice, and I believe in an example would be 2019, 2020. Our tribe went to bat with our governor, Christy Nome, about this idea of closing borders on reservations, and in order to protect our people from COVID, our coronavirus. And that was a big dispute because we closed major roadways where we monitored what was coming in and what was going out, and making sure that we kept our community safe. And we had this big head-to-head clash with our governor. But again, we were able to create a voice behind us, and we had other states back us, as well as we had district representatives in South Dakota come to our aid as well. So I believe in today's times it's a lot more progressive, and not to say better, but progressive is the word.
A hard question coming to you is, we've heard over the course of time that the government has forced the people live on land that was stolen from them in the first place. So can you elaborate on that and what it really means, and how can it be remedied?
Well, with the idea of natives being displaced onto different reservations, there's this thought process that goes into that of the context of owning land and what does that mean. Again, we can look back on Native American history in the sense of, yeah, we did feud with other tribes for areas, but it wasn't for the exact land right there. It was for the resources that were available in essence. And so I come from the Dakota, which again, we're a nomadic nation to where we travel wherever the buffalo go. And so the idea of being able to follow and to source your food in that sense of, that was what directed your life to the sense of being placed into a certain location and being allotted X amount of, food for that month or that year. There was some struggles early on in reservation life where those that kept guard of reservation. So basically we were confined to the reservation at first before it was, again, and opened up, air quotes. So everything coming in was monitored. And so there is history that recollects a lot of the food source coming in being halted at the gates, in a sense, air quote gates, but halted upon entry and rummaged through, and then whatever was left over was given to the native people. So this idea of being placed into this location that they weren't meant to thrive, much of the native land that they were given was, it wasn't the best for farming, it wasn't the best for hunting, and a lot of it's far from many water sources. And so again, it's this idea of being placed in a place or into a location where it wasn't optimal, and being saying, hey, this is where your people are from, be proud. And the fact of us being able to reclaim that land and say, this is our home, and create that sense of pride is very important. But even then, we still face today's times where, again, a lot of tribes get checkerboarded in the sense of throughout the land, there are non-native people that were buying land that really displace everybody, and it creates this dialogue within the communities that shows that, okay, well, as Native American people, we're not valued as in the sense of, because these guys are landowners and we're just a part of this bigger group. So it's this idea of understanding land in today's times is a lot different. And so being placed onto those reservations, it did take a lot away from us, and it did really, in essence, clip our wings, if that makes sense, and made us look at a different sense of living. And again, you could draw in so much from that, in a sense of that historical trauma, this idea of having to go through that life change. As anybody in life, when we go through different changes, sometimes if it's less optimal, what arises from that, this idea of depression. And so again, it's this idea of depression that kind of continues and plagues us in today's times.
Well, do you personally feel that over time, time softens the blow that was delivered, years ago? Do you find that that's still prevalent in some of the minds of the people about the stolen land, and is it burned?
I feel like, in essence, that's a term that people who aren't a part of the group that it happened to, they use this idea of time softens things. So this idea of, again, we're still living in a sense of, we still practice our traditional ways. We still go to different ceremonies that our ancestors practice. We still, we're a horse nation, so we all use horses on our reservation. That's still a part of our way of life. We still have these different things that connect us to that past. So in essence, we could still be felt what was said back then. So this idea of things softening, yeah, we might be able to say like, okay, well, we can't do nothing about it, but we're still feeling the effects of it again. And that's in that very subjective term that I keep referencing, this idea of historical trauma. So it's this carried trauma that, and somehow one way or another, we instill in us innately. And, we in today's times, we may not be mentally conscious of the different things that our ancestors had to go through and had to endure to being a part of today's times, where we have the after effects. So even if we acknowledge it, the after effects are still there. And that's kind of the tricky, that's the slippery slope we're going down right now, and we're trying to figure out how to reverse that. And that's where I tie in this idea of acknowledgement. Like, again, we can't retrogress, we can't go back in a sense of like, oh, let's change things back then. There's no changing things. It's just that we have to create that common mind of saying, okay, well, if there's no changing things, how can we move forward? But so many people were hurt in so many different ways that it's hard to get everybody on one similar page moving forward. And that's, again, a huge reason why I'm a part of the social work program, is how can I better reach out to that idea? How can I better aid that idea going forward?
Native Americans, rich in history and culture and all that. What part do you take in the tradition and keeping that alive?
It's very subjective. Each Native American practices in their own way, whether they grew up on reservations or not. I was fortunate enough to grow up on a reservation with my grandparents, and so I was exposed to a lot of different things early on, whether it be going to powwows, contest powwows, such as you get money from dancing, or there's traditional powwows, which is just a community gathering. And it's this idea of coming together and spending time. We have things in that nature. We have ceremonies that happen each year. One that I particularly participate in, and I may struggle with this year being away from home, was this idea of, it's called Wakia Agli, which means welcoming back the Thunder Beings. And what it is we would travel to the highest point in the Black Hills, and we would do a ceremony up there. And this idea of it's welcoming in the new year, basically. And that's the essence, is our new year, this renewal process, which we go forward and we move into this idea of Sundance season coming, I would say early summer, midsummer, and then some even into late summer. They practice this ceremony as well. And then even the little things, like this morning I got up and I burn my sage and I say my prayer, and that's something I carry going forward. But I also once a week call my grandfather and speak our traditional language to each other. And so I'm grateful that he has taught me and he has shared with me our language, and I'm able to converse with him in that sense. So it's this idea of, again, the traditions I still practice, are very much relevant in today's times and a part of who I am. And I was fortunate enough, though, to have those around me growing up that really instilled those ideas into me. But again, this idea of those that don't grow up on reservations, how do they, just by them being there, by them wanting to learn and having that quest for knowledge, is again essence of still them keeping those traditional ideas alive. Because so long story short, that's kind of what I.
Okay. Hey, can you tell me a little bit more about water protectors?
Yeah. Well, back in, I get the years mixed up, but I would say it would have been when I was a sophomore or so in college. So that would have been 2016, 2017. A protest sparked up in Standing Rock. Would be Standing Rock Sioux tribe, which is in Fort Yates, North Dakota, and I believe in Cannonball as well. It's a kind of a small area in a sense, but there was a major water source going through there in which I believe it was KXL pipeline was trying to build over, or they were trying to go under the water source with a pipeline for oil. And so there was a big uprising saying like, okay, well, these pipelines aren't always for certain whether or not they may or may not break, and that water provides many resources to the surrounding area. So this idea of water protector came about in that time frame where it was time for us to stand up for our water rights, in a sense of we don't want to be drinking oil. And what's crazy is that pipeline was built south of Bismarck, which is a big community in North Dakota, which I believe is where the capital is. It was built to where the water doesn't flow directly into it. So if we said, okay, well, if you wanted to build this, why not build it up above the Bismarck waterway and then come down? And then again, they weren't willing to compromise. They were willing to build it over Native American land. And so this idea of water protectors came about that year, where their main idea was to, okay, well, in whatever way, let's go to the waterfront and try to stop this construction. And that carries forth into today's time as well, as the tar sands up in Minnesota. There's another major water source that a Canadian oil company is coming through and trying to build over, and risk the possible contamination. So you have these people that travel to these locations, and it varies. They got those that make it their life in the sense of activism, and you have those that, again, maybe make a deal out of saying, I'm going to go up there and I'm going to stand in solidarity. Or you have those like, again, I'm down in St. Louis, so I'm not able to actually be there, but it's this fact of me being able to carry those prayers. So the idea of water protector is viewed in a number of ways. And, it's very important today's times in the sense of this idea of clean water. As we can see, California is struggling in this drought. We see our decline in natural resources. Water is essential, and that's a given. So it's this idea of how it's remarkable to me personally, how us wanting to protect our water sources is viewed as us resisting us, and so again, that the water protector, that's kind of where that arose from.
What is the greatest threat now to Native people, and what can I or anyone do to help?
I would say, if it had to be one thing for the greatest threat, is ourselves, is sense of we are unable to grow with modern times in the time frame that we were given and with the resources we're given. And we're not asking for handouts. We're not asking for things to be figured out for us, but it's this idea of we need that acknowledgement. We need that sense of feeling like we're accurate members of today's society. We don't need to feel like we're the pastime. We're not some backdrop in a John Wayne movie anymore. We're the idea of we're still here, we're still practicing our ways. So in a sense of from general society, that idea again of acknowledgement goes a long ways. This idea of saying, I respect you and your history. It doesn't have to be nothing more than that. It doesn't mean, in today's mindset of, the people dressing up like American Indians for Halloween and saying, I'm honoring their people, or the Redskin logo of, well, it's honoring Native people. We don't need it in that sense. We need it in a sense of saying, you're just as every right part of this. We don't treat you as a mascot. We don't treat you as a backdrop anymore, but rather we understand your culture is valuable and your history, as much as our history, is just a part of this same environment. So the idea of drawing back to, the Pilgrims landing, of being able to civil, or what would you call it, to build the United States in essence and move westward. A lot of that came from Native American knowledge, this idea of traditional farming methods, an idea of corn, idea of beans, this idea of, being able to cultivate the land to people that, didn't normally have those resources. So it's teaching those ways and acknowledging that rather than skipping over it and making it this lighthearted idea of, this, oh, the Pilgrims met the Indians, they had a good dinner, Thanksgiving, and that was it. We lived happily ever after, but rather saying, no, they actually had dinner, but at that dinner, all the Native Americans were killed. And so it's this idea of us moving forward from that, saying, okay, well, let's stop killing Native Americans. And it doesn't, I don't mean that directly, but I mean that in sense of, let's start looking at it as, okay, well, how do we change that narrative? How do we change from being the victims and then those that are doing, doing the acts in the sense of, and some of it's very unconsciously. And so this idea of being more mindful, this idea of, an example would be in Minnesota, there's a lake called Lake Calhoun. Calhoun was, General Calhoun was this Army general who did not care for Native Americans and made it rightfully known. He did not care for anybody of color. He made that rightfully known. But that land has been reverted back to traditional, and now it's Bede Makaska, which translates to, and it's not hard to pronounce, but what it translates is to where the sky touches the water. And that was a traditional place for Native American people. So for them to give that back to Native people and take this name off of this land that was somebody who was an oppressor of Native people and acknowledging it. And then, so again, but then also us as Native Americans, we have to say, people are just naive in a sense. They're not aware. They don't see it. So how do we better educate ourselves in a sense of go to grad school, go to undergraduate, go out into the workforce, just get that experience under your belt, work with people, and it's the idea of building that as opposed to us just being surrounded by Native Americans on our little reservations and that being our only life way. So the idea of us being able to expand our horizons, what we need from ourselves, but this idea of being able to be accepted into that majority. And that's kind of where we're at this in today's times is we're on this, you can only give so much attention to one thing. And so you got so many protests going on. You got so many, you got people still protesting for up in Minnesota, and even down here being in St. Louis, I could still feel the effects of the protests from Ferguson. And I can still feel that physically in a sense of when you drive around and you see how people interact with one another and you see how vocal the Black community is here. So it's this idea of us constantly creating this open dialogue and not having these preconceived ideas and understanding that we're moving towards a more inclusive ideal of living. So not just for Native people, but for all minorities. And even that idea of being able to move back from the minority and majority sense and this idea of creating equilibrium. I say that in a sense of you're always going to have a push and a pull. So the idea of equilibrium is very important to where we reach a certain level of homeostasis where we're all able to be in this mindset. And it's an active, it's not just saying we're all, living in peace and harmony and hugging each other, but it's this active dialogue of pushing and pulling, but at the proper times.
If there was just one thing that you could do, I could do, the government could do to make things better all the way around, is there such a thing as one?
I say this in a non-egocentrical way for myself, but the fact of me being able to be out here and striving as a young Native American, I feel like that's what we need, is to show that it's possible. And for me to be able to do interviews like this, for me to be able to make conversation like this, for me to meet people outside of my norm is what's, I feel like, the one thing that I could benefit our community. Because again, everything I learn, everything I acquire from here, I am able to take home to this reservation that, again, is an established place, and add it to the better. And that's my hopes, that's my intention with this. So again, it's not coming from saying I'm benefiting from it because it benefits my community. But that's a huge reason why I'm out here. It's not entirely just for myself. It's for how can I make my community a better place? So I feel that's the one thing that I could be doing personally, and in hopes to inspire others to take a similar route. And like I said, I don't limit it to just grad school. I know the workforce has a huge play. So this idea of being able to put yourself in a job that allows you to grow, allows you to learn, and similar to my grandfather, my grandfather, he worked for however many years, 40, 50 plus years as road construction. That was his way of growing up, and we'd be traveling in some random place in the middle of the United States, Arizona, be it, whatever, not, but this idea, he would say, I remember working on this road back in the day. He would travel to do these jobs, but the essence of him going out and experiencing that really expanded his idea of the world. And so it's just the idea of, again, inspiring those to get out and do something for themselves.
Well, Bray, I tell you, I'm a richer man by talking with you today. I enjoyed it immensely, and gosh only knows, I hope things keeps on the upswing, if there is such a thing.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Of course. I appreciate you for asking those questions and being an avid listener. It means a lot to be able to speak with somebody on these. And for me, it does do me good because, again, I do have a close relationship with my grandfather, and we just went past, and this is getting personal, but we went past my grandma's passing, which was 3 years ago, just recently. So this idea to speak with you is very, in my context I'm living in, this idea of moving on my own to live down in St. Louis, to be able to speak with you and to hear your input is very heartwarming and very fulfilling in a sense. So I'm grateful to start my day in this way. So I'll go forward today, and I'll go forward in this week with a happy heart.
And I think to myself,